Hey everybody, and welcome to my channel. So lovely to have you here. Today I'm going to be talking to my wonderful book coach, Samantha Skal. Samantha, say hello.
Hi everybody.
But before we delve in, please do remember to hit the subscribe button below so you get notified when I have my next interview and the next fabulous guest, and you can learn to write up level your writing craft and make sure that you get your book written, because that's what it's all about. But before we delve into our conversation, let me just tell you a little bit more about Samantha. She is a fan of true crime and mysteries of all kinds. She is an Author Accelerator certified book coach who specialises in coaching mystery, thriller and suspense authors from novel planning all the way through to agent pitching. She especially loves brainstorming twists and reveals and the hell that is revision, which is how I find Samantha. She is also an agented author, thriller author currently working on her debut novel, a serial killer thriller. She is the 2023 Co-Director of PitchFest, or Thrillerfest, International Thriller Writers Annual Writing Conference, and a frequent volunteer mentor for the Women's Fiction Writers Association. She is also an enthusiastic member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime. An enthusiast of homemade sourdough and cheese of all kinds, she adores scary stories that keep her up at night, kayaking on calm water, hiking on well-maintained trails, and good red wine. She's a huge fan of #Bookstagram and talks about her favorite books on at Author Samantha Skal. So, hey, Samantha, lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Emma. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you on. I always love our chats. I not only do I love the banter, but I always learn a little something as well. So it's
right back at you.
Where was your first love of crime? What is it, do you think, about crime and fiction that crime and thriller that you particularly love, and that you, because it's the second most popular genre at the moment?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. So I have always been a reader, like most of us, right? I started reading when I was very small, started writing my own stories. They were terrible, but I actually found one the other day. I was at my mom's house and I pulled out this little thing, and took a hard left turn at about 75% that made no sense, but we had some good buildup and it was fun. It was about a penguin who went to space.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. But I think the true crime thing, I just have always been drawn to like the darkness in fiction. I don't know what that says about me psychologically, but it is what it is. And so then I discovered romantic suspense when I was much too young to discover romantic suspense. I was probably 10. And my mom had this whole bookshelf of romances, Nora Roberts classic for a reason. And I picked up Montana Sky, which is like one of her best romantic suspense books, I think. And I just loved it. I mean, I didn't understand all the spicy stuff. I was way too young, but the actual, like there's a kidnapping and there's a murder and there's like darkness and they're in a blizzard, and it just really tickled me. So that was kind of the beginning. And ever since then, I've sought out the scary stories. I just love them.
And so getting darker and darker. And do you like a sort of crossing over into horror where it can get really dark?
Yeah, I try to limit the type of horror that I coach and that I kind of read, because it does get too scary sometimes. I've definitely read some books where it kept me up all night, and not in a good way. It wasn't because I was like turning the pages and super engaged. It was because I was too scared. So yeah, I like creature horror, like, B-movie kind of monsters coming out of, I love that stuff, but the like true slasher stuff, I'm not that into. So like the Saw, if we're talking movies,
yeah,
not super into that, but like give me a good Anacondas any day,
So if it kind of feels too outrageous to be real, then that's okay.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, I think so. It's like, that's not going to happen, so it's fine.
I'm like you. I can't watch those real sort of slasher horrors. I get just like, oh, even though I know it's not going to happen, it just seems too, it might.
Yeah,
it's just that element of it.
I don't want that in my head.
No, but I am a fan of true crime. But I did that what's his name, the American Daimler, not Daimler, Daller. What was the serial killer called? And there was the
Oh,
Netflix
Jeffrey
one.
Dahmer.
That's it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
managed to get 2 episodes into that, and it was just
Yeah.
too realistic. It was just too.
Yeah, I haven't watched that one yet, and I am curious, but it's also like the true crime stuff, small doses. Like I listen to podcasts, that's how I absorb my true crime.
Yeah.
I think because I'm a visual learner, and so if I hear it, it's not so scary.
There's something to be said for that, isn't there? And there's something about a podcast that keeps it light. It keeps it, hey, we're telling a story here. But yeah, the Jeffrey Dahmer one was, and well, I'd be keen to know what you think of it, but I just couldn't get past the first 2 episodes.
Yeah, there's a lot out there that's really intense. Like Mindhunter was really good if we're talking TV shows, because that was about the side of the FBI trying to dive into the psychology behind what was going on with these horrific humans that were doing terrible things. And I think that's honestly what draws me to thriller and horror and suspense and mystery is the psychology. Like that's often what I get into with my own books, and where when I'm coaching people, it's like, why would this person do this? Why would this scary person do this? What's their logic? You know, because everybody has a goal, even if it's to murder people, which is terrible.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that question of why is the all important one, and I certainly know with the people I coach, when I ask that question in their writing, so why did they do this, and why are they saying that? Stop asking.
Yeah, it's hard to answer sometimes, but that's one of the fun things about writing. Like I often have I've written 2 full-length novels now. Neither of them are out yet. I'm working on my debut with my agent. But from the first one, I had a POV from the killer's perspective, which means that I had to get in this person's head. And I have some clients who have the same, where we're in the head of the supervillain. And it's hard. It's really hard. Like you have to kind of take it in small doses, especially, you know, the worse things they're doing, the harder it is.
Yeah.
But understanding that they're the hero of their own story is one of the key ways of looking at that. And it just, yeah, it's tough. So if anyone out there is struggling with that, know that small doses is the way to go. But, you know, this is what's going to make it really engaging for the reader.
Yes. Yeah. I love what you said there about as well, that they're the hero of the villain is the hero of their own story. And in fact, kind of like everybody is the hero of their own story. And once you get into their head, then they start doing things that the reader might not expect. And I think maybe that is a way into kind of getting into those twists and reveals.
Absolutely.
By seeing things from a different point of view. But
yeah,
I thought a good place to start, we are talking about twists and reveals, and they're not the same thing, are they? And I wonder if you could help kind of differentiate them for us.
Yeah, of course. So these words are more or less taken from one of my author heroes, Ruth Ware. I saw her speak at Thrillerfest online during COVID, and she's amazing. If you haven't read her books, please do. But she defined, and I think this is one of the best definitions I've heard, twists are an answer to a question the reader has not asked yet, has not thought to ask, and reveals are the answer to a question the reader knows to ask. And so when you're revealing something, it's usually to a big hanging question, like who is the killer? Why, you know, who is the person behind this mask? Like, this is terrible examples, but I think you get my point. And then twists are something that's unexpected. So there's usually one at about 50% that sort of changes the course of what's going on with the story. And this applies across genres, by the way. It's more common to have 3 in thriller and mystery and suspense, but even in romance, you usually have something that happens midway through that sort of just changes everything.
Yeah.
And then in thrillers, you have one at the climax. So it's like, I'm coming into this thinking this one thing, everything is different. And so I've learned something, and here I am going to conquer and, you know, finish out this story. And then, you know, in modern thrillers, there's now this one at like the last 5% where it completely reverses everything that the reader thought was happening. And so it's really fun. It's really fun.
It is. So I'm glad that you pointed out that the actual fact this is kind of needed for every genre and story, not just even I would say for literary, you want something that is going to just make it just an added bit of cleverness, if you like, for from your author. So you mentioned that in a suspense or thriller we're looking for 3 of these twists, and then so presumably in other nothing's ever set in stone, but in other genres you might be able to get away with two would be okay.
Yeah, I'd recommend two. So like a standard romance, right? Like you're going to have something at the midpoint that's going to reverse what's going on. That's pretty standard. And again, these are standards, you know, like you can break them, but know what you're breaking before you break them and why. And then at the climax, there's usually going to be something that usually it's a misunderstanding in romance. So it's like, oh, I thought that you loved this person, but actually you love me. Okay, here we are. And now we're riding off into the sunset. Usually not a final twist in those situations. But yeah, two is a good safe bet. And it's often based on some kind of misunderstanding, which it can be in thrillers too. You know, people make assumptions about what's going on, who the killer might be, what's actually happening. And then it turns out they were totally off base. There's your twist.
Yes, it's exciting when that happens. I love it when that happens.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do, isn't it? When just first off the bat, I mean, if you're doing first drafting, it's hard to get all of those twists in there. As the creator, you have probably got this idea, you know, what if such and such happened, but then it turns out it's this one. And that can quite often be the starting point for an idea. And then we've got to kind of layer in the additional twists, the additional reveals and red herrings. And certainly I think this is something to emphasize, because I think there are a lot of newer writers out there who think, wow, how did the writer come up with that all in one go? How did they know to put this in chapter 2 and it would come back at chapter 17? And I was talking to Troy Lambert from Plotter about this, and he was saying, he gets those questions all the time from people. It's like, no, I didn't know I needed to put that in chapter 3. I had to do that in revision.
It's all in revision is the answer. I mean, there's probably some magical unicorns out there who can just write this stuff from scratch. And, you know, Hank Philippi Ryan actually is somebody I've heard talk, and I think she might actually just be a pantser who can come up with this on the fly, but even she has some revision. So don't beat yourself up if this isn't coming super easily. Most of us are in the camp of writing the story and then having an idea about 75% of the way through and figuring out what that looks like if you're going to have this be a twist, or if, you know, there's a new twist and you have to back into it and put all the rest of it for clues and revision.
Revision, it is. That is where the magic happens. And because I work with you, obviously, you are my coach, and it's been a joyful experience.
Gladly.
Frustrating at times.
Yes.
And particularly frustrating because of this tool that you use, which is it's so good that you can't not use it, but it does make you work. This is a tool that makes you work, but the result of that work is so worth the while. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about it, because it's how you can kind of make sure that you've got all the twists and turns and reveals that you need.
Yes. So this is a tool. I'm going to pull up Jenny's book. So for those not familiar, Jenny Nash, who is the founder and CEO of Author Accelerator and also the inventor of the Blueprint method and the Inside Outline, which is the tool that we're going to be talking about. Absolutely genius tool, very difficult to master. It's one of those things that, like Emma was saying, it's, you know, it's frustrating, but then once you get into it, it becomes just the way that you can move forward and have the biggest impact when planning all these twists and reveals. So the basic understanding of it is that there is plot, which is what actually happens in the scene, and then the point, which is how what's happening in the plot impacts the main character. So what do they think about it emotionally? How does it change them? If you're operating with, you know, like a misbelief or I call it a major malfunction because I grew up in the 90s. You know, like how does what's happening in the plot sort of butt up against what's going on in their head? That's the point. And so in this way, we can track what's happening on the page and then what's happening one level underneath, which is like all that interiority, all the, you know, this is where you get misdirection and red herrings too, because someone will make an assumption based on their major malfunction. And then all of a sudden at 50%, they're like, oh, that's not actually what's happening at all. It was like, because I thought this because of this. And so, yeah, the Inside Outline is a wonderful, wonderful tool. And I make all my clients use it. I use it myself. I've definitely had those moments where I want to throw my computer across the wall because it's so frustrating, but that's you push through that and then it's magic.
Yeah, it is. I do agree with you. So from if we take the plot kind of element of it. What I like about that, I'm a very linear person, and so what I enjoy about it is that I can see, okay, at the end of this scene, I know that there's a consequence of that's happened at the end of the scene, and it leads me naturally into the next scene.
Exactly.
And that means that I get that. I use this phrase a little too often at the moment, that cause and effect trajectory.
Yes.
That logic that comes through, and I can see, oh yeah, you would do that if this happened. And I like how that moves the story forward cleanly. I'm not someone who writes in a patchwork or puzzler fashion, as we've discovered.
Yeah.
Do you find that, I mean, are you a linear writer as well, or do you kind of jump in and out?
So it sort of depends on the day, to be honest. I tend to write in a linear fashion, but I do have my moments where I'll think of something and I'll go in and focus on that scene for a bit. But again, the inside outline is a tool that allows you to see your entire story. Jenny likes to say in the palm of your hand, because you can print it out and have 3 pages of your entire story, which is so much easier than working on 90,000 words in an unwieldy, even if you're in Scrivener or something where you can pop into chapters, like it just gets tough. And so if I'm, if I have a draft and I have a basic inside outline where I kind of know what's going to happen, this is when I might go in and think like, oh, maybe the killer is this person, not this person. And I can track what happens throughout the entire book with that. And so in that way, I'm more of a puzzler, because I'll pop in and fix this over here and then come back over here and put a red herring in. But all of this happens in the outline. Even if I have 50,000 words or whatever, I'm working on the outline before I actually go in and start revising the manuscript.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's maybe an element of you that's a sort of discovery writer, and you kind of delve in, have a go, see what's happening, and then start to refine it through the outline.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think I'm a discovery writer. When I start a new project, I'll usually write about 10,000 words just to see who these people are and kind of see what happens. It usually does not end up in the final manuscript, because I, like most of us, need to get it out and just write some backstory. And then the story actually starts at like, whatever, at 15,000 words. But once I figure that out, I have some idea about, who the person doing bad things is, who my protagonist is, what kind of the main obstacle is, what the story question is. And from that point, I'll then go and write an inside outline as best I can. It always changes. And then write forward from there. But it's good to stop at like, 25%, 50%, 75%, and just check and look back at your outline. So keep your outline updated, and then what you need to change. And so I don't recommend going and like rewriting everything if you're at 50%, but you can make notes on the outline and say like, okay, I've got to go back in to chapter 2 and fix this thing, because the reader needs to know that to make this make sense.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know it does. And I was just thinking about some writers I know who, they would find that hard, and they'd want to go back in immediately and kind of.
It's so hard. Yeah, you've got to kind of tie one hand behind your back, but this is how you make forward progress, right? Because the goal is to get a draft out, but you don't want to have that draft be such that you're rewriting the entire thing. And so this is why you check in. And just make sure. And if you do have, like in my first novel, the first full-length novel I wrote, I discovered that the killer was not the person I thought they were at the 75% mark. And I'm sitting there in the climactic scene being like, oh my God, I've got to change so much. But then you look back and it actually worked, because the writer didn't know that this person was the killer. So the reader didn't either. And so sometimes it can work in your favor. But yes, there's so much room for creativity and discoverability and all that stuff within this. You just got to remember what you need to change. And sometimes this does mean scrapping words, but that's part of writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter how much you plan something in advance, there's still going to be bits that you cut and you realize don't fit. I talked to Janice Hardy quite a bit at Fiction University, and she's a big planner. And even she's saying, my plan changes all the time though, because as I get to know the characters and then get to know the story, then naturally things shift and change. And she'll use her plan, much like the outline is, just to keep that, to use business terminology, it's a living document. It's always changing. Yeah. But it's so useful. I wanted to just kind of chat about the point element of this. I think that's for me, certainly, I found this the trickier part of the outline.
Yeah.
And the reason I found it tricky was because you would be kind of encouraging me to delve into nuance, and we're really having to give words to difficult and complex emotions quite often, and it can be a subtle change that a character has, but that subtle change is enough to lead them into the next part of the book and the next kind of plan that they've got.
Yeah, I mean, that's psychology. It's psychology, right? You're wondering why someone is doing something and, you know, why they might be taking a certain action. And, you know, usually when we enter the story, there's something going on that they're battling, right? We all have battles. Like if I entered a story right now, I'd have a major malfunction that I'd have to face, right? Like it's just, you can look at your life and figure out what you're dealing with. But that introspection, that's what creates a deep character that the reader's really going to resonate with. And so, you know, I coach thrillers mostly. I have some clients come to me and they're like, I don't need an emotional arc, it's a thriller. And it's like, well, okay, if you're writing like a, you know, Jason Bourne type thing, I use that as an example quite a bit actually, because he does have an emotional arc. He's like very angry at what's happened to him, and then he falls in love and opens up his heart, and then he's even more angry. That's an arc, right? And so we need to, but that informs what goes on in the plot. So like what comes at him in the plot is what's happening, and that was very carefully designed. Those are amazing books, but how he reacts, that's where his malfunction is informing what's going on.
So even at those that are considered to have a flat arc, there's stuff going on, and there's and it might even be even more nuanced than a kind of big arc. But this is what it was hard going through, and I was so glad I had you to work with on it, and to be able to kind of push me and pick up on things that I miss, because it's so easy to miss things in our own work, because we have what Jenny calls that curse of knowledge, that we know exactly what's going on. But we can, if we decide to use an outline, and we can use it as a way of figuring out what's missing, you know, where we could add something else in, a new reveal in, or a new twist. But also we can check for pace. I know that's something that you like working on as well, and making sure the book has a good pace to it. So is there anything that we can that maybe we haven't covered in talking about the outline that we could include now to talk about pace?
So once you know, let's say you're at the point where you have a draft of 70,000 words or whatever, and you have your as is outline that's matching what's there, and you have a sense that maybe things are, you know, there's a big boring spot in the middle or something, which usually you can tell if you're reading and you get bored. It's a time to take a look at it. But what I like to do is, you know, print it out or use Word or whatever, and get highlighters out. Red is high action and blue is low action, or whatever colors you choose, just make them different, and go through and highlight everything that's like super intense and suspenseful, or like a really, you know, a moment where somebody is struggling or something. Those are high intensity moments. And then low intensity is like a breather, like, okay, I'm going to work, I'm having coffee, I'm, you know, rehashing what's going on in the plot, which we need those moments. And so if you have something where it's all red, it's all high intensity, add some breather moments in there so the reader can take a breath and just understand what's happening. And, you know, this roller coaster, this is what we're going for. We don't ever want to have just all intense, because that becomes boring. I mean, think of like, I'm not going to name any movies but like there are some superhero movies out there where it's just all fighting, and it's like you get bored after a while. You're like, okay, so it's been like 20 minutes and like they haven't won. I don't really care anymore. Like, you know, it keeps going and you get bored. We don't want that for our readers. We want this. And the same thing if it's all blue, you know, add an intense moment, add something where they think that something is going on and they take some action on it. That raises the intensity.
What a great way of doing it. You're just using simple colors. I think that's really
it
lovely.
Works really well. Yeah.
And like also as you're reading through, it gives you a chance to read through your manuscript as well, and kind of take notes and maybe update your outline. And
I mean, you can do it on the outline, you can do it in the manuscript. I prefer to do this on the outline, which is why I have my writers keep the outline up to date, and we check in on it as we're going. But, you know, when I approach this from somebody who's wanting to plan a novel before they start writing, there's a lot of pre-work we do to figure out the malfunction and all that stuff. And pacing is definitely one of those things that we check. because we don't want like 4 scenes in a row where it's all super intense. We need little breather moments.
Oh, I didn't realize you did it, because you and I haven't done that particular exercise.
We connected when you had your entire manuscript already done, which is also a place I love to jump in as well. But the process is effectively the same. So we read through your whole manuscript, and then we went into coaching for revision. And the first thing we did was make an as-is inside outline and figure out what's actually going on in the story. And then we can look at the outline and determine what needs to change, as opposed to going through and having this like unwieldy, excellent bones manuscript, but like it becomes unwieldy when it's 90,000 words, 80,000 words, whatever it is.
Yeah, it really does. Yes, no, I was in that revision hell that we mentioned in
your it's
bio.
A tough place to be. I've been there too.
It was so funny. I was looking at I just found your website and I was looking it up, and there in big bold letters, "Are you in revision hell?" And it was like, yes, actually I am. Okay, you are the person
me.
for
That's
me.
Yeah.
You hit my pain point perfectly.
Yeah. As someone who's been there, I know it very well.
So the other thing I want to emphasize to writers, and it's something that I learned to my great joy about this outline, and we're talking about it a lot because for a reason, because it is challenging, but it's so worth it. And the reason I found it so worth it, and I don't know if your other clients say this, but when it was all there, when we had the outline pretty much finalized, then I could just go into each chapter and look reference to the outline and go, okay, now I know exactly what I need to put in here and what I need to say about their emotions, because I've already worked it out. So it made the revision so much easier.
So much easier, right? Well, and how many times did we get, we had moments of frustration and overwhelm, which happens in revision. It's a normal part of it. The whole goal of using the inside outline and doing this process is to make it not overwhelming, but it does come up. And there were times where I'd ask you, like, why is this person thinking this thing? And you'd tell me something and it would be like, put that in the manuscript, what you just said. And it's like 2 sentences of interiority solves what the logic and the pacing and the, all of it. And it's done, right? Like not done, but like we've fixed that little problem. And sometimes it's as simple as that. It's just 1 or 2 sentences.
Yeah. And honestly, I was kind of laughing to myself at times going, oh, can't believe it's all there already. I just need to put it in.
Yeah.
Don't need to use my brain again.
It's the reason I record all my client calls, so that when somebody says something like this, it can be like, okay, what you just said, just put that verbatim in your manuscript and we're good on that point.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So just for anybody listening, I hope nobody's thinking, oh my gosh, this sounds like hard work. But I want you to understand that writing a book is hard work. Like there's no two ways about it. It's an intellectual conundrum, a challenge, a puzzle that you do need to figure out if you want to write a good story. But this is a super tool that's just going to help you do that.
Yeah, game changer for sure. Yeah, I mean, well, let me just tell a cautionary tale at first. So my first novel that I wrote, this is the one that I got an agent for, and then we ultimately decided to put it in a drawer, which I can tell you is very difficult. It hurts, and it was the right decision. I completely agreed with her, and we're still working together, so all is good. Fingers crossed that she likes this next one I'm about to send her in the next month or so. But when I was making that novel, I think I wrote 300,000 words and ended up with 85. And that revision hell, this is why I know what this looks like, because I kept writing in these directions and taking it all the way to the end, because I didn't know that there's an easier way, which is to stop and have a look at what's actually going on and then fix it and then go back in these targeted ways that you were talking about. But it's so overwhelming to think about what you need to do if you figure out there's some fatal flaw. So I had at one point the protagonist did a logical left turn that made no sense, and it kind of ruined the rest of the story. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to actually get that on the page without rewriting everything. So I just rewrote it. This was my approach, was just like go all in and like not take a step back, but taking a step back and having somebody help you project manage yourself by using the outline and making a list of what you need to do. This is the way to avoid that hellish place. And I'm not going to lie, there are still some hellish moments, but it's a way better situation than, throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah, I had a similar experience actually with my first novel, and yeah, ended up, because I discovery write as well, and ended up taking
Yeah.
her down this whole other path. And I realized I liked the path, but it just was I was never gonna, I could not figure out a way to pull it back round to kind of make
Yeah.
sense for the end of the story. So then I had just kind of thought of it like a tree, and the
Yeah.
branches in a tree, and I thought, okay, well, I've just got to go back to where that branch comes off and then find another way forward. And I think that was one of my kind of first lessons around, this is solvable. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean I'm a bad writer, but it means
No.
it's a puzzle I've just got to figure out.
Yeah, the puzzle, I love the puzzle analogy. I think it's just, it makes it less intimidating, right? And it makes it seem like there's a solution at the end, because puzzles do all fit together in the end. It's one of the reasons we do them, right? It's very satisfying.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, sometimes you've got to lop off the branch and just, put it in your next book file.
Yes, yes. And I would also say, just kind of in terms of the enjoyment factor at the end, but almost the harder it is, the more you are so proud of yourself at the end that
So
you stuck
proud.
with it and you
Yeah,
got it. So it's worth sticking with, I think.
it is. And for all the listeners, Emma's book is amazing and I can't wait for it to come out. It's such a good story.
Yeah, well, actually, I might as well do a shout out. If you are a thriller reader, I will be looking for a couple of beta readers. So if anybody fancies being a beta reader, drop me a line at emma@emmadesi.com. Thank you for that,
You're
Sam.
welcome.
Thanks for that little shout out. I tell you something I did want to ask you about, because I've seen this come up. Well, I think you've seen it in, I can't remember now, you might have seen it in my writing, and I've certainly seen it in some of my clients' writing, which is the idea of giving the game away.
Ah,
So you're
yes.
kind of giving the ending away before, and I know I've certainly done this in some manuscripts, and I think I'm alluding to something exciting that's going to happen later on in the book that will intrigue my reader and make them want to continue reading.
Yeah.
But actually we give the end away, don't we? And then we're taking the impetus away. So I wondered if you could just speak into that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways of looking at that. So the first is, if you have some big secret that the protagonist or POV character has, sometimes it can be much better for the suspense to let the reader in on that on like page 5 or page 1 or whatever. So my current manuscript is one of these situations where I have a book coach too. Every book coach I know has a book coach, because we know the value of this. And she pointed out I was keeping it a secret, and I had it revealed in what you're talking about. I was like, oh, I'm going to wait because people are going to, it's going to be this huge thing. And Carrie, my book coach, was like, no, we don't know what to care about, because we know there's a secret, but we're frustrated because we don't understand why she's making the decision she's making. And so I changed it and put this secret on page 1, and it's a big secret. And all of a sudden the book started reading much more suspensefully, because we understood how much pressure that she was under, to like keep this secret and move forward.
Right.
The flip side of that is when you have something where maybe the POV character doesn't know what it is, and they know that there's just something out there, and the whole story is about them figuring out what that is, and then they can confront it in the climax, and all of a sudden you've got like a raging, high octane thriller kind of situation. Both of them work. And so you've got to decide what, if there is some kind of secret, when you reveal it, but don't let it go too long, because then the reader won't know what to care about.
So it sounds like the kind of a way of figuring out the best path is, does your point of view character know the secret, or is this something that they are going to discover as they go along? And then if they do know the secret, it's probably best to share that with the reader near the front.
Yeah, I mean, exceptions, right? And there's also this third tangent that's like, if you have an unreliable narrator and you don't want the reader to know what they know, Gone Girl is a classic example of this, right? Like, but you can never, the rule of thumb, if you still want your readers to trust you, is if you have POV and you're doing interiority, like first person or close third or whatever, you can't lie to the reader. So they can't lie to themselves inside their head. And so all the lies need to be through dialogue or through something else, or you have another character looking at this character and making assumptions. That's another way to do it. But yeah, there's a classic thing that I think older novels, like when you have omniscient POV, like these mysteries, and there weren't really thrillers back then, but like these mysteries from like the early 1900s or even up through the 50s, there was this thing where you might say, and it was the last time she saw him alive, or, you know, whatever. It's like this editorialization.
Oh.
And it does work at times, but if you're talking about a close POV, which is much, like by far and away the most classic way to do things now, because we as readers like to be in the head of the person trying to solve this stuff, we then know what's going to happen. And so don't do that to them. You know, instead focus on the fear, focus on what the POV character is feeling and what they think might happen, as opposed to knowing from the standpoint of the end of the story that this will happen.
Yeah.
Does that make
The
sense?
Emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. I always like to tell people, figure out what your person is scared of and then just like really lean into that. Yeah. Which again probably says something about me, but I don't mind.
Do you know what it is? I'm listening to a thriller called, I think it's called Under the Water, or Under the Sea, and I'm now forgotten the name of the writer, but they find it's a woman and her husband, and they're out snorkeling and they're diving in the ocean, and they find this suitcase, a bag.
Ooh, I'm gonna just have you look up what this is. I'm gonna read it.
Yeah, I will. I'll look it up in a minute actually, and just share it, because and basically what they find is inside this hold-all there's $1 million in cash, and then there's which in itself wasn't particularly scary. But then they open up this suitcase, and inside the suitcase is $1 million worth of diamonds, a gun, and a USB stick. And it's just like those three things combined, you just know.
Such good mystery. Yeah.
It's like just the combination of them. And then you add in the it was all in Russian, and you kind of immediately are thinking mafia, oligarchs.
Totally.
You know? Like, oh, this is quite scary. I'm gonna have to look it up now whilst we're here. Because I've had to, you were talking earlier about doing it and writing it in bits and pieces and small pieces. Yeah. I've had to listen to this in small pieces as well. Something in the Water by Catherine Steadman. It's
cool.
Something in the Water.
Write that down.
I do recommend it. It's good. Yeah. So yeah, good tips there about not giving away the ending, but especially nowadays when we're close POV, third POV usually. Knowing, you know, letting your reader in on what your POV character knows, and then having to be kind of clever about how you let other information be shared within it, and then either decide to share the secret up front, or what did you say, around the kind of 50% mark, did you say?
I mean, it just depends on what you're going for with your reader manipulation. So this is the other thing about thrillers that I think first-time novelists, I certainly didn't understand this when I first started writing and before I started doing this work. It's very manipulative. The author is there to manipulate the reader into thinking what we want them to think in order to increase the pacing, increase the suspense, all these things. And so this is where red herrings, misdirection, all that stuff comes in, because we want them to like be focusing over here when actually this is happening over here. And you want just enough on the page so that by the time the reader gets to the end and everything is revealed and they look back, they think, oh my God, that totally makes sense and I didn't see it. But it's not totally illogical. You know, it's not just like where did that come from? We want there to be just enough. And it takes a lot of tweaking to get there. So oftentimes what happens with thrillers and mysteries and suspense is you end up writing a novel and you get it done. And, you know, maybe you send it to a beta reader or two, and you kind of ask them, like, when did you figure out who the person was that was doing the bad things? When did you know, kind of figure out the mystery? If there's some big secret, like, when did you figure out what it was? And if that comes too early, that's an indication that you have too much on the page and you've got to back it off. If they get to the end and they're like, I had no idea that was coming and I'm really confused and I feel kind of like violated because I trusted you to like lead me through this story. We don't want that either. We want them to feel like the author has done a very clever thing by having just enough so that it's there at the end. It all makes sense.
Yeah, I mentioning the beta readers there, I think that is just another indication of why writing a novel is not a solitary endeavor. That you do need, even if you don't work with a coach, you do need to have somebody who can be objective
Yes.
And for as clever and as pre-planning, as much pre-planning as we can do, and as many revisions as we can do, sometimes we cannot see the wood for the trees. And so we do need to get somebody else to work on it with us. What do you feel has been one of your biggest learnings from working with your coach? Because I'm guessing that before working with your coach, you were like the majority of us, kind of plodding away, doing your thing, sending penguins off into space. So what do you think has been one of the things that has really kind of helped you in your writing, and that maybe you've taken into your coaching as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the biggest thing is that you, as a writer, talking about this like author view, I can't see what I can't see, right? And so even if I put it down for 3 months, 6 months, I don't think I've ever gone that long. I think the longest I made it is like 3 weeks, because like the rest of us, I'm impatient and I want to get it done. But you don't have enough space to step back and see what's not there or what needs to be there that the reader doesn't know. And so these things like giving away too much or not giving away enough or putting the secret up front so the reader knows what to care about. I really felt very strongly that the reader did not need to know this secret. And that was the first big comment she had, was like, we've got to know what's going on, because otherwise we're just sitting there being super confused and we can't sink into the story. So that's the biggest thing, is just having another pair of eyeballs from an outside perspective, looking at things like logic and pacing and, you know, do the actions make sense, or, you know, does it feel completely random, which oftentimes, going back to the one sentence thing, can be solved by a couple of sentences of interiority. And, you know, having the person think like, oh, this is that, and this is a terrible idea for me to do this, but it feels right because X, and here I go. Next chapter, you know?
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the biggest learnings I got from you, actually, is that some things can be done really simply. It's not
it doesn't
always
have
a big
to be
rewrite. Which is what I had in my head.
Yeah. And also it's just nice having somebody point out. So when I first hired a coach with my first book, which was fundamentally broken in many ways, and I was so grateful to her for pointing all of that, you know, everything out, is that we kind of get suckered into the idea that our story has to be a certain way. Once you sit with the story for long enough, it becomes sort of cement, is kind of how I like to think about it. And having somebody say like, no, you're in charge, you can change this, is eye-opening, you know? And like, what if you didn't have this character? What if this wasn't set in this place? What if this person had a sister who turned out to be the serial killer or whatever? Like,
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but we certainly had that moment in my book, and you were asking me, you know, well, could the house be next to a river? And I was like, oh, no, because the house is in a field, and next to the field. And you were thinking, yeah, but Emma, this is in your head, it's not real. You can change it if you want to. Oh yes.
Oh right, I can change this. And it, you know, once you sort of like unbreak those links that have been cemented in, which happens to everybody, it's just that outside perspective. That's the biggest thing. And again, knowing that you don't have to write in a vacuum. Like, you know, coaching can be prohibitively expensive, but there's options. You know, there's free webinars, there's like group coaching, often with a bunch of people who do this. There's a critique group that you form yourself. But just that outside pair of eyeballs is the key.
I agree. Did the brainstorming as well. I love that.
I love it.
Aspects of it, and you know, how can we get our character into more trouble rather than how to get them out of trouble? That's often good. And you've come up with ideas that I wouldn't have had on my own. And not to be underestimated either is accountability. That when we're working, if we're indie like I am, I don't have a publisher waiting for the book. I am my own boss. I get to decide when I'm going to publish my books. And so it can be easy or easier to let other things take over, and the book can get pushed to the side. And I know that there are many listening who probably kind of acknowledge that in their own lives. But when you've got somebody who you've paid to work with and have invested a substantial amount of money, or what you might not normally spend on your writing, you do the work.
You do the work. This is such a good point. So, you know, again, I just hired a book coach to help me with this book. I hit a bout of writer's block in like November. I just wasn't motivated, and I was, you know, 80% of the way through. I knew how it needed to end. I had it all planned out. And I am a very deadline driven person. I am type A. I got good grades. I know what this looks like. And I know that if somebody else is telling me they need it by a certain date, I will deliver, even if it's that procrastination, like, so stay up all night and finish it, which is exactly what happened, by the way. Super embarrassing. But I turned it in by the deadline we set, which was New Year's Eve. And I finished the damn book, and it just, because I paid her money and because I knew that this was going to move me forward, all of a sudden I made major progress. And it's a game changer. It's just like, and I know there's people out there who are thinking like, oh, I feel seen. Yes, it's okay to want deadlines, and it's okay to want accountability. And, even if you do have a publisher waiting for a manuscript, or you're in that position where, you're like indie publishing and you're on a schedule and you're trying to hit those deadlines, having somebody keep you going so that you're not working on too much all at once, and you're getting feedback as you write, so you don't do that 300,000 words in the wrong direction thing that I did. It really helps.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you said that about not doing too much at any one time. I've just done a podcast episode about writing in chunks and chunking down. So do look out for that. I'll mention that in the show notes. So we've gone on to coaching. I want to bring us back to thriller writing, plots and things. Is there anything that hasn't come up for me that I haven't asked that you think is worth kind of mentioning for our listeners?
So one of the biggest things I see, and we're, kind of going back to wanting to hold things back and like creating these hanging questions. If we don't, and I'll use my book as an example, if we don't know why the POV character is like, what their goal is and what they're after, it's an opportunity it's a lost opportunity for suspense, basically. So the more that we are clear as the reader on what the goals are and what they're scared of happening in every single scene, the more that we're going to feel that suspense, and that pacing is going to increase, and we're going to have moments of breathing because we can have the character think back like, I'm super scared of this, but also these things, but also this thing I'm still scared of. Like, it's a lesson in anxiety, right? We want our main characters to be super anxious and letting us know through their inner thought what they're scared of. So that clarity is one of the things I work on the most with my authors. Is like, okay, I think it's straight in your head. I have a sense that like this is completely clear in your head, but the reader does not understand what this person is scared of or what they want. And so the clarity of goals, and also that fear is key
Yes.
for reader engagement.
It really is, and that's something I've certainly learned to improve under your tutelage as well. You have written a fantastic chapter for this in our book Launchpad, the countdown to writing your book. So you really do know your stuff, especially when it comes to suspense, when it comes to twists, how to add in that depth. And I think people do consider thriller books and crime books to be not as deep as other books, but I've certainly learned that that's not true, that there is a lot to it, that the psychology behind it is almost the most scary part than what actually happens to them. So even if for no other reason, I recommend people run out and buy Launchpad, because you'll get more.
So many smart people.
And you'll get so much more of Sam's knowledge in that book, and you'll have it there for reference as well, that you can come back to time and time again. And of course, if you're looking for a coach, I would absolutely recommend reaching out to Sam.
Thank you.
See how she can help. But listen, Samantha, it's been fantastic. We are it's gone so quickly, our time together. I can't believe it. It always does. But tell us, where is the best place for people to find out more about you if they want to learn more about suspense and twists?
Yes. So my website is just samanthaskal.com. Skal is how you spell my last name, and everything is there. I'd love to hear from you. I'm always looking for new thrillers to work on. And even if you don't write thrillers, I love suspense. I love tension. I love all that stuff. So feel free to reach out.
Perfect. I will absolutely be sure to put that in the notes as well. Well, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.